My name is Samantha Sibusaran. I'm the creator and co-founder of platformafrica.com, which is a Pan-African news portal with a focus on finance, technology and entrepreneurship. We have followers from over 50 countries in Africa, and we're seeking to showcase what Mauritius can do for Africa and also what Africa can do for the world. I'm very much engaged in communications in Africa as I run a PR agency in Mauritius called Perpetual Motion. I'm also representing CIPR International in Mauritius, where we've been running a webinar program with a fantastic team at Africa Communications Week. And I'm also the Women in Africa Ambassador for Mauritius. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome some of my colleagues this evening. So this webinar is focused on the theme of communicating Africa's true potential. Our starting point is that Africa is the most dynamic continent in the world with the youngest population, and it's shown relative resilience in the light of COVID. It's a hotbed for entrepreneurship and for startups. We're also seeing that intra-Africa trade is likely to get a huge boost from the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has been implemented in January 2021. So we now have the chance to show the power of Africa as a bloc, and not only that of individual countries that stand out. So how can we now communicate the true potential of Africa, both within Africa and also to the outside world, to promote trade and investment? What are some of the key messages that we need to promote? And how can we leverage the power of African networks and the media to this end? So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce a wonderful panel who are here with us this evening. First of all, I'd like to start with Hafsat Abiola. She's the president of Women in Africa, which is the foremost organisation promoting entrepreneurship and sustainable development. She's from Nigeria. She's an economist by background with degrees from Harvard and Tsinghua. She's a pro-democracy activist who's lost both of her parents, sadly, to her country's struggle for democracy. She's a former member of the state's cabinet in charge of the Millennium Development Goals and also trade and investment portfolios. Hafsat truly believes in women's equal engagement in the economy and in governance systems, and that this will lead to a better world. Second, today we have Carl Chiwa. Carl is the head of international banking at Bank One in Mauritius. He hails from Malawi, but describes himself as a true Pan-African, as he surely is. So Carl is a seasoned Pan-African executive in the banking domain. He has a focus on corporate banking, structured trade and commodity finance, on project finance and financial advisory services. He has developed deep networks on the African continent through 20 years of proven track records of experience in origination, in structuring, in executing large ticket strategic transactions across a wide range of sectors in Africa. He was previously the head of trade finance at Citi for the sub-Saharan African region, and now he's been working at Bank One in Mauritius since 2018. And finally, I'd like to introduce Anne Walker-Marchant, who's joining us today from Washington, DC. So Anne is the CEO of the Walker-Marchant Group, which is a strategic public relations and public affairs firm specializing in corporate communications, in crisis communications, media relations and global issues management. Anne is an experienced strategist. She's created campaigns that influence public opinion, impacts public policy, and she's directing a team of experts in DC. She has also helped political candidates, global corporations and organizations to align their business goals, their messaging and their value propositions in order to promote greater awareness, engagement, activation and mobilization. Anne has also worked at the heart of US government in the White House for President Clinton as a special assistant to the president for communications research and special projects. And I'm also glad to be connected to Anne through WIA, where Anne is the Women in Africa Ambassador for the US. So I think that we've got a wonderful panel this evening. Thank you to everyone for being here and for joining us. So what we'll do now is we'll have 10 minutes per speaker to share some of their views on the topics concerned, and then we'll be taking Q&A at the end. So I'm going to start with Hafsat. Hi there, Hafsat, great to have you with us. So my first question then, Hafsat, you come from Nigeria and you have a very international perspective as someone who's lived in the United States, in China, and now in Europe. So how do you see the position of Africa today and how is it evolving? And looking at your international experience, what sets Africa apart from some of the other emerging nations currently, or powers such as China and also India?
So it's lovely to be with you, Samantha, and with you also, Anne. Nice to meet you, Carl. Really, I'm excited about this topic about really shining the light on Africa's true potential. Because when I look at the continent of Africa, I feel like someone that is in China in the 80s, in the very early 80s, in like 82. I remember actually my dad went to China around 80, 81, 82. And he came back incredibly in awe of that place, of the number of people, the sheer size, and where it was then was people all in their bicycles, pretty much wearing the same thing. And then you blink. And if you blink for too long, you probably miss their growth, because now they're the second largest economy in the world. I mean, their growth has been incredible. And I think that Africa is the next China. I think that we have huge potential, and already in fact, I think we're more even in 88, 89 relative to where China was at that time, not even 81, 82, because already the continent of Africa has 300 million people categorized as middle class. About 30% of the continent's population is middle class. So we're not in the very early stages of China's opening up, but really farther along. And this our growth has been quite steady and dynamic except for this this COVID-19 period. Of the 20 fastest growing economies, easily 10 were African countries. Of the 40 fastest growing before COVID-19, half, 20 were African countries. So Africa has been growing at a very dynamic clip for many decades. And our middle class is growing, and it's not growth driven just by minerals, because when people think about the countries in Africa, they think of raw materials. Actually, what has been driving a lot of our growth has been services, fintech, digital, finance, entertainment. Nigeria, for example, has the second most productive film industry in the world, second only to India. It's larger even than Hollywood. So I think that people, if they blink for too long, when they think of Africa, they will miss our arrival, our emergence, because we're very much on the way. And even with the disruption of COVID-19, which has had an economic impact on the continent, and everything you read tells you how actually COVID-19 has had more of a health impact for Africa and more of an economic impact than an impact on our health so far. And I hope that continues to be the case. Actually, to me, I see it more as an economic opportunity, because before COVID-19, we had all these multinationals on the continent. Their backward integration into the local economies were near zero. And all of a sudden, their supply chain, their global supply chain is disrupted. And they're having to look for suppliers within country. That's an opening for all our entrepreneurs across Africa. So if the government can support the multinationals with the right policies and incentives, in 5-10 years, we will have even more diversified economies across the continent. So to me, COVID-19 could be the making of Africa. It could even be what cements our emergence completely, because before COVID-19, we were having to compete with India, we were having to compete with China. Well, because all the multinationals are now seeing the risk in concentrating their supply chain in singular countries, it's an opening and an opportunity for Africa, because they want suppliers that are very close to them, and that's an opportunity for our entrepreneurs. So I think that we need to bank on that and use that as a leverage to push our entrepreneurs to the last mile, because I think the big challenge for the continent is the fact that our wealth is so unevenly distributed, and our local economy is so poorly developed. Yes, there's a lot of dynamism all across the continent, but it's too concentrated and it's not being shared. It's not inclusive enough, and that could be a danger and could cause instability, as we've seen with protests in Tunisia, in Senegal, just even and Nigeria, even in the last 6 months. So if we want to contain the potential political instability in Africa, we need to be very aggressive and bullish about making sure that growth is inclusive and prosperity is shared. And I think COVID-19 gives us that opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Hafsat, for starting us off. So now let's move on to the power of networks. So we all share a common belief in the true power of networks, whether it's Women in Africa, which you are leading, or even Africa Communications Week, which is bringing like-minded professionals together this week. So Hafsat, how can we harness the power of these networks in order to define and to tell the story of Africa's future potential?
Well, I know that Anne is going to speak about the very important role that the US can play. I mean, it is the most important economy in the world. Singularly, the United States lifted Western Europe after the Second World War. Singularly, there was nobody else. It was through their Marshall Plan. So we know what the power of the United States, if they decide that they want to get behind the continent, what that power could mean for Africa. So when I look at Anne, and that's one of the reasons why Women in Africa has been a little bit, maybe excessively putting pressure on Anne. I mean, before COVID-19, so all the world went into lockdown in March. In February, I was in the US with Anne, and Anne opened our Rolodex, which is one of the most impressive in just that you could have in the United States. She's worked with President Obama, President Clinton. She has such a huge and impressive network, and not just politically. Some of the Fortune 500 companies, the people that are top in those companies are personal friends of hers. And she was so generous with her time because she set up all these meetings. We were in California. I don't want to mention where we were because if I say, then it becomes clear who we were even seeing. I mean, that it was just that impressive. I mean, we were seeing companies that own whole cities, so whole towns. And she was taking us to the very top of those companies. We needed that. We need that. And we need to use all our networks to achieve that. What are we trying to do? We're trying to get them to think of how they can get behind us, because the kind of power that the United States has, the kind of power that the United Kingdom, France, Germany, these Western countries, now Asian countries, Brazil, it's incredible. And we need that because actually, I used to live in China. I did, as you mentioned in my bio, I lived there for 3 years and it was so beautiful. I mean, even more stunning than what my father experienced in the 80s. But when I lived there, one of the things I recognized was just not that I was seeing the dynamism of Chinese people, I saw that, but I also saw global partnership, global investment into China. It's part of the Chinese success story. And so if we want to have that kind of dynamism on the continent, we're going to have to convince major players in the Fortune 500 of the United States. We're going to have to convince major policymakers to take a bet on the continent and come up with policies, incentives to encourage American companies to set up joint ventures or partnerships with us. We need something like a global Marshall Plan, but it doesn't have to be so organized, but it must have that kind of ambition. And then, I'm here in Belgium. I see what it has done for Europe, and that opportunity also exists for us in Africa.
Great, thank you so much, Hafsat. So going on to our last question for you then. So taking account all the things you've just mentioned, what would you say are some of the key messages that Africa should now be sending out to the world?
I think a big message is that Africa is ready for business. And I mean, real win-win business, the kind of business that makes a huge amount of money for the people coming to invest and is a huge boon for the continent. I mean, I think every African person is tired of the plundering, extractive, I want to use the word is evil, kind of business that we've experienced for centuries. We're tired of it. And we know that there's so much wealth to be made on the continent, but we want the good guys to come. And we know that we deserve for the good guys to come. I was just in Mali until I came back on Monday from Mali. As I flew out of Mali, the military launched a coup against the president there. But what was so beautiful to me when I was in Mali was just the most incredible people. When I was in high school, I went to Phillips Academy, Andover, which is one of like maybe the top one high school in the United States. Yay! And so while I was there, I had one of my classmates a year ahead of me. Her name was Siga Diokoran Keita. Siga then left America at the age of 19. I have not seen Siga in about 25 years. So when I landed in Mali, I sent her a message. Siga came right away to the hotel and she took me to her house and she gave me something called red tebujien, which is like this very special food. Then the next day she gave me white tebujien, which is another very special take on the same food. And just, just the warmth, the caring. And that's what we're ready to give to our dear friends when they come. They will do business and they will make money, but they will meet friends, lifelong friends, and they will find the most credible people, trustworthy people. And it will just make their lives so much better. So I always say, and this is what I want to close with, that if Africa is like China was in the 80s, what we're offering the world is a front row seat. That if they take that seat, 30 years from now, when Anne, by that time, Anne's daughter, who is in medical school, will be a mother herself, and Anne will be a grandmother, and the grandchildren will gather around her and they'll say, so tell us again about how you transformed the whole continent. And she will be old. She's very beautiful. She'll still be beautiful then, but she'll be much more frail. But she will tell them the story and they will look at her and they will see power. They will see that they're looking at not an old, frail woman, but a woman that transcends time, a legend in her time. And that's what Africa is offering to the world, that we hope they will seize this opportunity and join us.
Well, thank you, Hafsat. We could talk for hours, but now I'm afraid we must pass over to Carl, who I'm also very keen to hear from. So thank you again. So Carl, if we come on now to some of the more trade and investment aspects that yourself are particularly involved in. So on the 1st of January, the African Continental Free Trade Area came into effect. It's the most ambitious regional integration project that the continent has ever seen. Can you give us an overview, first of all, of what this agreement means for the economic transformation of the continent?
Thanks, Samantha, and thanks everybody for having me. First of all, like you, I just to say, I can listen to Haspat for the whole day. I mean, I'm just mesmerized by her passion and her energy for Africa. But anyway, to the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, it's something that I think was an idea which was birthed by our forefathers at the birth of the African Organization of African Unity with Kwame Nkrumah and all the Pan-Africanists. But it took a long, long while to get here. But it took the leadership of someone like Paul Kagame and the political will to just pull everybody together and say, guys, this is the direction we're going to go. It brings together a lot of the regional free trade agreements that are already there with COMESA, SADC, West Africa, you got ECOWAS, and East Africa, you got the East African Community. And all these guys were, forming their own regional clubs, but, from a population and a scale perspective, it wasn't really moving the needle. Because if you look at East Africa, the 5 countries, that's about 200 million people, right? If you look at Southern Africa, another 200-300 million people. But when you have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, that's 1.3 billion people. So any global multinational will start to pay attention to a market of 1.3 billion if you're all integrated and you're all speaking with one voice, right? And from a economy perspective, they're saying $3 trillion economy for now, but that's just the start of it. If you think like what Haspat is saying, in the next 50 years, Africa is the fastest growing economy in terms of population. And studies by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation say that by the year 2050, 2060, Africa will have 3 billion people and will have the youngest population in terms of working age, whereas the rest of the continent, or the rest of the globe rather, is going on the other side. Japan is set to drop population by 20%. China is going to drop from 1 billion to about 800 million. Even India is going to drop. So the growth is always going to be in Africa. That growth comes with 2 things, right? A lot of challenges, because you're going to have to engage the youth, keep them employed, keep that energy bristling and under control, and create opportunities to harness the energy of youth. but it also gives opportunities for growth, right? So far, what I would say is it's not going to be a magic bullet. Like everybody thinks that 1st of January, you flick the switch and everybody is happy, kumbaya. There's going to be a lot of hard work from a policy perspective. First of all, it takes political will to ensure this thing happens. The first phase is going to drop non-tariff tariff barriers for doing business in Africa. About 90% of all the tariffs will disappear in the next 10 years. And most of the 55 countries, I'd say 45 to 50 have already signed to this, and a lot of them have ratified. About 44 countries have ratified the agreement. But the ultimate aim is to have free movement of goods, free movement of services, free movement of people. But that'll take time. It'll take a lot of investment in logistics, because you can't have somebody in Nairobi selling to somebody in Lagos. It's a long way away. But in the meantime, the first part will be the small regional blocks. Once you are able to reduce the tariff barriers, I see East Africa trading a lot more with itself, Southern Africa trading a lot more with itself, and then West Africa trading a lot more with itself. Then there will be a convergence in about 10, 15 years when the infrastructure catches up, when the railways, the bridges, and open skies. Because the biggest problem we have in Africa is, as you know, people will do business with people that they know and like. And traveling in Africa is not cheap. I live in Mauritius. It's cheaper for me to fly to Hong Kong than it is to Harare, which is ridiculous, right? When I used to live in Nairobi, a ticket to Barcelona was $500, whereas a ticket to my hometown, Blantyre, a 2-hour flight would be $1,000. So how do you trade with somebody when you have to pay $1,000 ticket every time you want to see them? So those are the kind of things that are a hurdle. I don't think they're insurmountable. They'll take time. They'll take patience. They'll take political will. But like you said at the beginning, Samantha, we're a hotbed of innovation, right? We're going to leapfrog some of this, I'd say, classic economic theory where you start from industrial revolution, going to manufacturing, then to a service economy. I believe China already took the manufacturing. We're not going to, try to compete with China on manufacturing. But like Hafsat says, we have a lot of service economy that's growing, a lot of tech, a lot of innovation. If you go to Joburg, you go to Lagos, you go to Nairobi, the amount of fintech startups going on, it's almost like Silicon Valley. In fact, in Nairobi, they're calling it Savannah Valley because it's a startup for fintechs in Africa. And the mobile money, as you know, it was invented in Kenya, right? It's just spread all over the world and everybody else is catching on, but Kenya has been doing this for 12 years, right? So I believe that political will is important and we will get there, but it'll be patient, there'll be fits, there'll be starts. But apart from the tariff barriers, we also need to get real about the non-tariff barriers, because that's what really, really sort of blocks the trade. Because you can reduce and legislate tariff barriers, but you can't legislate bad behavior, right? There's still a lot of, even amongst ourselves as Africans, if we really want to be real about it, a lot of mistrust about trading across borders. You feel like it's a zero-sum game. I have to win, you have to lose. So the political will that I'm talking about is let's grow the pie to the point where people are not worried about sharing little pieces of the pie, but the pie is big enough for everybody to share. So that's what I would say about the African Free Trade Agreement. At the moment, 1.3 billion people as a market, $3 trillion economy, the second largest free trade agreement behind the WTO, but it's still a work in progress.
Great, thank you so much, Carl. So let's talk a little bit more about the intra-Africa trade angle, because you've just mentioned some of the issues about trading across borders. And is there a story to be told within Africa about the agreement that says we now have the chance to keep the money within Africa, within the continent? And what can we also say to address perceptions of risk, which can even be within the continents, to say I'm used to doing business here, but I'm not used to doing it there? So from a communication standpoint, how can we resolve that, Carl?
Sure. I think that I'll tackle that in three ways, right? The intra-Africa trade story, I think it's the stats that are thrown around are not correct, because what's captured in the macroeconomic data is the formal trade, right? They say 17% of Africa trades within itself, and that's really the way you've got bills of lading, you've got trucks, you've got goods moving across borders. But 70% of the actual trade across Africa is not done formally. As you know, it's done informally. It's women like my mom, my aunts, my grandmas who used to, get on a bus with goods loaded up. They'll go to South Africa, they'll trade there for 2 weeks, buy things in South Africa, come back to Zimbabwe or Botswana and sell. And that trade is hardly recorded. So there is a lot of intra-Africa trade, it's just not, recorded by the quote-unquote economists. So what we need to do is make it easier for those women, and I'm glad that you got women in Africa here. We need to make it easier for those women to be able to travel across borders, feel safe when they're traveling, because that's a big issue, right? They get harassed a lot at the borders. You have to pay bribes to get your goods across. You have to pay bribes at the customs, and it's not safe. So, it's a space there for fintechs to come in and say, look, how can a cross-border trader, small SME or micro SME, move across with a mobile wallet where they don't have to have physical cash to trade? They keep their money in a mobile wallet. They can move from one country, switch currencies easily, right? Let's say if I'm in South Africa, I want to use Rand, but I go to Botswana, I want to use Pula, then I want to go to Zambia, I want to use Kwacha. Can I use one mobile wallet across and have my iPhone or my smartphone, because there's almost a 90% cell phone penetration in Africa. That's one thing that people don't realize. Most people have even 2 phones. If you find some of these countries, you'll have 120% cell phone penetration, and you wonder why, because people have one, which is one for mobile money and one is for calling, depending on who's cheaper, right? So we need to make it safe, and we need to remove the non-tariff barriers where people are not harassed at the borders. And we also need to find a way to formalize, have a platform like, the way you have with not, what do I say? To have a digitized economy where people can digitize on the mobile money and trade across. When you cross the border, you know what the price of your goods are, you know what they're going to be sold at, you're not going to be, ripped off by somebody. So that informal trade has to be sort of formalized, commoditized, and become transparent. And then you see there's a lot more intra-African trade. The second part of your question is, how do we look at, reducing some of the hurdles? Like I said, logistics is a big thing. We need to build the railway. I mean, I'm not really a big fan of Cecil John Rhodes, was our colonizer, but he had a dream, which is to build a railway from Cape to Cairo. I actually wish he had lived long enough to build that railway, because that would change the economy of Africa completely. I know a lot of countries are, with the help of China, building a lot of rail infrastructure. That will bring down the cost of transporting goods. For example, in my home country, Malawi, it's a landlocked country. We have to import goods either through Mozambique, from Beira, or through Tanzania, which is about 1,200 kilometers away. And it costs $70 a ton to bring something from Dar es Salaam to Blantyre. But it costs you $20 a ton to bring it from China to Dar es Salaam. The economics don't make sense. We need to figure out a way how to move those goods inland in a safe, efficient manner, and which is profitable for everybody. And then the third part of your question is, how do we manage risk? I think there's 2 parts to that. One is the communication. We've never been having a chance to tell our own stories. Every time you turn on the major news networks, I'm not going to say who they are here, you'll find a little picture of an African kid with thousands of flies on their face, or the next picture you find is a little child soldier with an AK-47. And that's the perception of most people about Africa. Whereas, I like the way the Kenyans, have taken their own story. I don't know if you know, in 2014, when CNN ran a headline saying Kenya is the hotbed of terrorism. And I like what you said, Samantha, when you said it's actually the hotbed of innovation. Kenyans took to Twitter and they had a hashtag, someone tell CNN, and they said, Kenya is this, Kenya is a hotbed of innovation. We came up with mobile money. We've got Oscar winners like Lupita Nyong'o. We have the best parks in the world. And to the point where the senior executives of CNN had to come in and apologize to Kenya for misrepresenting the country. So one of the things we need to do is use our platforms like this platform and tell the real stories about the success of Africa, like what Haspat has been saying, right? And the second part, I think, is for people like me who are in the banking and finance industry. I sit offshore in Mauritius. People feel Mauritius is a little bit safer than Africa from a perception perspective. So we are able to, because I look at the whole continent, I look at all 55 countries, I'm able to look at investors and say, look, what is your portfolio? What do you want to do in Africa? You want to do healthcare, you want to do education, you want to do manufacturing, you want to do service. This is where you go, because each country is different, right? A lot of people are ignorant or don't take time to know about Africa. They think Joburg is the capital, Lagos is the other capital, and I've got a friend called John. Do you know him? You know, and I'm like, you know, these two countries are so far apart. You can never ever know somebody called John from Lagos. I mean, you could, but it's 1 in a billion, right? But it's a matter of people like me decoding the risk, telling you that the different jurisdictions have different laws, different tax regimes, different political cycles, the geopolitical, the nuance around it. And that's where I come in, and that's how I help investors to decode the continent. So I think it's up to us as also finance professionals to tell the true story. There are risks, you know, they're real risks, but they can be managed. And there's several ways to manage the risks, including, you know, taking political cover, insurance in countries where you're not feeling safe, in terms of terrorism, or where you find maybe there's a problem with exchange control, like in Nigeria, getting your dollars out is a problem. How do you structure that before you even go in the country to make sure that when you do invest and you want to get your money out, there's a, you know, safe, legal, and legitimate way to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Carl, for that. I mean, I think just one last point before we move on to Anne. So if we come to on the corporate side, what you were just saying about institutional and international investors, I mean, is there more that can be done in general to attract the international investors to Africa as a bloc, and not only just to individual countries? Is that something that can be done over time, do you think?
Sure, agreed. And I think the AFCTA is one good step ahead when you say, look, guys, we're now a market of 1.3 billion people. We're now the size of a China or the size of an India. Hey, you need to pay attention to us, right? And you find that we have a lot of smart, educated people. I always am at awe of people, Africans who are in really top positions. For example, the person who, even in the Pfizer research and development, one of the people who was responsible for coming up with the vaccine is a Zimbabwean. A lot of people don't know that, right? And he was part of the team that came up with the vaccine. So we need to, I think, attract our diaspora, because that's a huge talent pool that's there. And there's a reason why they're out there and they're not back home. We need to figure out a way to attract them to come back home and actually develop the economy and use them as our ambassadors, right? Because there's a lot of corporate Africans in Fortune 500 companies all over. Like, for example, before I came to Mauritius, I used to be with Citibank, right? One of the large global banks. And the city is everywhere in Africa. It's probably the only bank, American bank, that's really present in Africa, and they've been there for years. And they know the continent well. But we need a lot more of that, and a lot more people who understand and who want to play the long game, and who can look past the headlines. Because if you look at the headlines, you'll think, eish, Nigeria, eish, Mali, like you're saying, there's been a coup. And Chad, in fact, I was watching the news the other day when the Chad president was shot and died. And they had 4 people talking about the incident, and none of them was African. And I'm like, you couldn't find someone from Chad to actually tell you what's really going on. So I think it's a matter of us really stepping up and telling our own stories. There's an African proverb that says, when the hunter tells the story, he's always the hero, right? So we need to start telling our own stories and telling them well. I think that's what we need to do. And we should have our corporate people, corporate Africans, not shy of, actually engaging in the public sector. Because in the past, the public sector has always been, I would say, more of a domain for people who, the corporate, I would say the corporate elite did not want to mix with the public sector. They found that, the politics is dirty. I don't want to get my hands tainted. But I believe that if you leave your destiny to the hands of people less capable, you have only yourself to blame.
Indeed, that's quite right. Thank you very much, then, Carl. And so before we move on to Anne, I would just invite people to start posting any questions they may have in the chat, because we'll be coming on to questions in about another 10 minutes or so, and look forward to that. So thank you very much again, Carl, for sharing your insights. I'm now happy to move on to Anne. So Anne, so you're someone who's joining us that's from Washington, DC. You've worked at the very heart of the US government in the White House for President Clinton, and you're now running a strategic communications firm in Washington, DC. And also you're very much involved in African affairs as the WEA ambassador for the US as well. So, so tell us a bit from your standpoint, Anne, in DC. So how would you say Africa is currently perceived from the US? I think you might still be on mute, Anne. If you can just unmute yourself, we'll be delighted to hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be with my dear friend Hafsat and to meet Carl and hear their perspectives, which I completely agree with. I want to pick up a little bit on what Carl and Hafsat started to say about storytelling. And I think that one of the perceptions is that in the US, there's a lot more knowledge about Africa and about the benefits and what is happening in Africa than there is in reality. I am sad to say that I think that there is a lot of ignorance about not just the continent of Africa, but about a lot of things outside of the US borders. I'm not sure what the statistics are in other countries, but the majority of US citizens do not have passports. And the majority of US citizens that do have passports use them to go to Mexico and to the Caribbean. And many, many, many have never traveled across the ocean to any of the countries in Africa. So there's very little knowledge. And there's a lot of misperception. There's a lot of news coverage about the failings in Africa. There's a lot of news coverage about dictatorships, about poverty, about misappropriation of resources. And there's not the coverage of the positives, the innovation, the youngest population in the world, the entrepreneurship. Those stories aren't being told, and they really need to be told. And we're kind of at a very complex point in time where we're coming out of a political administration that for 4 years referred to countries where Black and Brown people came from in very derogative terms. And there is a miseducation and misunderstanding that was created by that. It was seen as these were mostly countries that we were providing aid to and not receiving much back from. We now are fortunate to have an administration that values the countries in Africa, that understands Africa. We have a domestic policy advisor, Susan Rice, who is a dear friend who started her international and diplomatic career as the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. So she comes from a knowledge base of Africa and has used that to use as a foundation and a stepping stone as she has held various positions as National Security Advisor, as the UN ambassador, and currently that she's been brought in to be domestic policy advisor because some of the diplomatic skill sets that she has developed are much needed now at this time in the United States because of some of the conflicts that we have here in our country. But that being said, there is a very high level of understanding within the administration and a commitment to the issues that are affecting Africa and policy and trade in Africa. There are two recent articles that I will mention that will kind of convey a little bit about where things are changing. There was a man by the name of Dan Gertler, who is very active, particularly
yeah, I know him.
Congo with cobalt. And the Trump administration, as we refer to, the former president administration had lifted sanctions against him. And there are atrocities that have been reported and have been witnessed under his leadership. One of the first things that the Biden administration did was reimpose those sanctions. But at the same time, when you see the articles, it again highlights what can be referred to as instability. And what I think Carl probably witnesses and others witness is businesses are tentative about how they invest, where they invest, who they invest with, who are the right partners, who are the right people, what are the right what are the right roads and avenues to take, and what are the roadmaps that may exist to help. So I think going back, there's a great opportunity with the Biden administration. I think that there is a very, very high threshold of public education that needs to be reached. And it's incumbent on us, those who know Africa, those who understand Africa, those who are African, to be able to communicate the attributes and the assets that exist, and the benefits and the values, and also differentiate, because Africa is not monolithic, and people, unfortunately, in the United States look at Africa as one country. And that again is based on ignorance. And there are so many different aspects of Africa. There are 55 countries that have different resources and that have different landscapes and different foundations and different governments. And as in every country, some are good, some are not as good, some provide opportunities, and some need more assistance. So I think telling our story and defining who we are on our terms, as opposed to the terms that other people have set forth, is really the first place that we need to start. And I think we've got a great opportunity now with this administration to do that. Even at some of the highest levels in corporations, as Hafsat and I saw when we went and we spoke to people who were very receptive, often we had to start at the beginning of the story on why Africa, why women in Africa, why is this a place that you want to pay attention to? Why is this a place that you want to invest in? Why is this someplace that you want to come and explore and visit and look for opportunities with us? So when we're talking about very high level C-suite relationships that we're having to start to build at that level, then we know that even further deep down in the population, there's so much to be learned and so much to be taught, but it is an opportunity for us, I think.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Anne, for getting us started. So, so if we come now to the public relations angle, how would you say that Africa can define its communication strategy in terms of messaging and branding? Because for now, we of course have individual companies, whether it's Mauritius, Rwanda, Morocco. I mean, everyone's doing their own individual country branding. So what do you think is the right approach on the global stage? Do you think there should be a sort of a concerted efforts to try to build brand Africa? Or should we keep more to the country by country approach that we've seen, which also has its merits? What would be the way to go about it? And if there should be a brand Africa, who should lead it?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but I posed that question to some of my colleagues. And these are colleagues who, are in international arenas and people who understand what is happening in the various countries. And I got two responses. I got one saying there are certain countries in Africa that have very, very strong brands and very strong reputations. And they named some of those countries. And then one person who was a diplomat said, and Egypt, oh, is Egypt in Africa? And so you have those types of responses. Morocco is absolutely fabulous and wonderful. Is Morocco considered part of Africa? So I think that the response is twofold. And I'm going to refer to something I'm not sure most people saw or not, but if you haven't, I would recommend looking at it. But yesterday being Africa Day, there was #Africa Day, and the African Union did what I thought was a very, very good campaign on Did You Know? And it was facts about Africa, and it was country specific. So did you know that Algeria is larger than Belgium, Germany, England, France, all put together? And it gave you an idea factually about not only the size and the geography of Africa, but about the benefits and the resources that exist and facts about each country. So it created a brand awareness of the continent while also identifying the specifics of each country that were, wow, did you know? That then caused me and caused others, because we were all talking about it on Twitter and on Instagram. Wow, did you know this? And caused people to start to dig further, and also created a conversation amongst some of us about the way we educate our children in the school systems here. We do a really bad job of educating them on the reality of being a African American in this country and what our history has been, much less being able to communicate and educate them on Africa and the countries in Africa that are part of our heritage. So I think my response would be that it's twofold. I think that we need to create a brand awareness for the continent based on an understanding of the countries that make up the continent and the diversity that exists and the opportunities that are varied depending on country to country, but highlighting those as the way that we paint the picture of what the continent of Africa is and what the opportunities are, and how Africa has got to be part of our future and the global future as we move forward in innovation, entrepreneurship, and climate in everything that we're doing.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Anne. So the last question before we move on to the Q&A then, just to sum up in terms of the international media's angle. So how can we bring the international media on board in this endeavour as we're trying to reshape the narrative? What would you say on that front, Anne?
So that's a challenge that we have because we're at a time where media has cut back on their resources, all over. But we have an opportunity with the internet and with digital to create our own opportunities to tell stories. One of the things that I noticed when I travel in many other countries, CNN has a very large platform on CNN Africa where they tell the stories of Africa. That doesn't exist in the United States. CNN does not broadcast that in the United States. And I don't know why, but that's an opportunity that's missed. If it's packaged, it's not a resource that has to be invested in. It's something that just needs to be turned on so people can understand the stories of Africa that are being told to other parts of the world but aren't being told here in the US. I think doing familiarization tours with media and with journalists, the story about the coverage of Chad being told through the eyes of nobody from Chad and nobody from Africa is one that should not happen. So how do we create our own ambassadors within the media who are focusing on the stories of Africa, who are focusing on the news of Africa, who are identifying the stories and the interests that need to be voiced to the rest of the world, and are proactively doing it, not just reactively doing it? How do we create our own media base? And maybe it's us taking a opportunity to do it ourselves. Maybe it's through blogs, maybe it's through podcasts, maybe it's not relying on the general media to do it, but maybe it's us creating a network to tell the stories ourselves, which goes back to what Carl and Hafsat were saying. How do we tell our own stories?
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for all of your insights. So we've got only 10 minutes for questions. We're not going to be able to fit them all in, but we'll see if we can manage a few in the time we have. So I'll start off with a question for Hafsat. So the question comes from Maranatha Nudwaya, who says, is it realistic to think about African branding as long as there is no real African common governance? Hafsat, what would you say in terms of your own institutional experience on that front?
Well, I mean, I think that more and more we have common governance. We have the African Union, We have continental institutions like the African Development Bank. Now, as Carl was saying, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and its headquarters in Ghana. We have more and more. And then even there's the African Export-Import Bank, the Africa Capacity Building Foundation. Yes, then we don't have enough, but we already have quite a bit. And we can build on that. So the African Union has a 2063 plan, which they entered into in 2013 to give African countries a 50-year plan for the continent. And I was involved in Nigeria's midterm strategic development plan. And to prepare that plan for 2025, 2030, and then 2050, we relied heavily on the African Union 2063 plan, because we know we're part of Africa. So we understood that everything we're planning has to align with the rest of the continent. So even though there isn't like this Africa, United States of Africa governments, already it's shaping the policies, the vision, the strategic documents from the African Union is shaping African countries. You know, when the African Development Bank this year will launch the affirmative finance action for women in Africa. It's just 300 million euro to try to meet the $42 billion financing gap for women entrepreneurs in Africa. It's for all of Africa. They're starting with 15 countries in year one, but then they'll expand out and they'll keep adding more to the pot to reach the women of Africa. So I think, you know, more and more we will see the value and we will see the fact that we are getting more and more integrated. But I think that beyond government integrating, which is one thing, which African governments have been even doing with NEPAD, which was launched by South Africa's former president, Thabo Mbeki, you know, but even beyond what the government does, it's also what the people do. I think of Women in Africa, but also other associations, continental associations of people, African people reaching across borders. You know, in Nigeria, we have this thing, this youth service corps, where we send Nigerian young people to anywhere but where they're from to help them learn about other parts of Nigeria. And when I was in Mali, I started thinking to myself, what about if we had something like that for Africa, where we would send young Africans anywhere but the region they're from? So let them go and learn. Let the West Africans go and be exposed to East Africans or North Africans or South Africa. Let's start to form the relationships. You know, what Anne is saying is very powerful, that the body of knowledge that would allow for, you know, really ambitious dreaming and co-creating with the United States has not really been built. And yes, we can start to do it. But I think we even have to do it within Africa itself. And actually, talking about that, I think the movies are doing a lot of work in that respect, because Nigerian movies, gangster movies, anywhere I go in Africa, they will just like, oh yes, you know, you're from Nigeria. They know about our clothes. They know about our music. They know about our wedding, how we do it.
And your food.
Yes, and they even know, like they go to their own tailors in Malawi or wherever, and they say, okay, make me what that girl was wearing in that film. I think slowly and surely there is interaction and exchange, but I think we need to be more intentional, more systematic. There's something powerful, you know, for a long time, it's this miseducation that Anne is talking about. It was not accidental. It was part of the effort to keep our African-American brothers in their place. And thank God they've rejected that placement and positioning in the United States. They've rejected it wholeheartedly, and they've been rejecting it for centuries. And recently, even the Black Lives Matter movement is also what is the latest iteration of that rejection. But even we have been miseducated, and we have to be intentional about showing love for each other. You know, we have to be intentional. If Black lives matter, then Black history matters, Black prosperity matters. And we cannot depend on other people to help us reclaim our history. I mean, I thank God, you know, that I'm no longer putting chemicals in my hair to make it straight. look at my beautiful hair. It was made for me in Mali by my little sister, my Siga's little niece. She spent hours, then she put all these jewels. I feel like a queen when I'm on the street in Belgium. And she did it, it's a gift to me. When my family saw it, they were so proud. My daughter immediately took a photo. I think we need to reclaim it all, because there is not every aspect of our culture that needs to go into the future, but there's so much to be proud of. And there's so much to be proud of from every part of the continent, even North Africa. Sometimes we feel like the North Africans don't want to relate with us. I'm sure even in Mauritius, if you guys want to be honest, sometimes they're ambivalent. And I think this is okay. We can allow for ambivalence, and we can try to nurture the sense that, yes, there's some issues. Yes, you don't want to be involved with fraudulent people from Nigeria, for example. But beyond those people, there are so many other kinds of Nigerians that you could date, that there are many opportunities. We need to reclaim ourselves. We need to, and our prosperity is linked to each other. Our African Americans' prosperity is linked to Africa. If American companies are coming to Africa, I want them led by African Americans. When in the one that in Kenya, when they launched that thing that everybody talks about whenever they talk about Kenya, the fintech revolution that was launched by a mobile phone company. Which one? Everybody.
Safaricom.
Safaricom. Safaricom was headed by an African American guy in Kenya.
Yeah.
He was an African American guy. Yeah. He later died of cancer, but this guy was gangster.
Yes.
It made, and I think, why not? We lost them because of the history that is tragic. We reclaim them now. We give them a space on the continent. Why not? Who else should have a space if not them? And we should do this for all Africans. When the African Continental Free Trade Area, when they launched, the foreign minister for the finance minister for Ghana, Ofori-Atta, he said that if we could increase intra-Africa trade by 1%, it would represent $70 billion. That's the money to be made just from an increase of 1%. So I want us to claim that money. The money is there for all of us. Let's claim it on behalf of the people of Africa and our diaspora, the old and the new.
Sure. Thanks, Haspat. Maybe just to add on to that, because I know we've got a few minutes, but I do believe there is a conversation to be had between Africans and African Americans. And I'm glad that traditionally there was that divide and rule, trying to make them separate from us, seeing us as different and they're seeing us as different. But the new generation I see of African Americans is really interested in connecting back to the roots. You see that in movies like Black Panther doing $1 billion. The new Eddie Murphy movie, the Coming to America 2, breaking box office records. It's because it's resonating with something. People really want to be connected to the continent. And like you're saying, social media is where the young people are. And if you look at social media, people are exchanging videos and knowledge and culture and music across the world, where people know who Davido is, they know who Shoma Josie is, all over the world, right? Without having to be signed to a big major label. So I think that is the way we should be telling our stories, like Anne says. We have our own destiny in our hands, and the more people understand that Africans and African Americans are not different, and I like what Ghana did when they said the year of the return, when they allowed every Black American to come and say, look, you're from Ghana, come back home. I think that was a powerful thing. Apparently that year, all the hotels in Accra were full.
I just have a little story quickly to tell. I know we have just a few minutes, but I don't know if most people know, but there's a brilliant woman by the name of Bosoma St. John, who is the head of marketing for Netflix here in the United States, who's originally from Ghana. And then there's another very dear friend of mine, Lovey, who's a big influencer and author here, who's from Nigeria. And the two of them are very active on social media. And we're going back and forth about what was better, Nigeria or Ghana. And they have a huge following of celebrities and entertainers, musicians, and sports athletes. And they decided that they were going to take everybody who wanted to go on a trip, and they were going to do a face-off between Nigeria and Ghana. And they had, 2 years ago before COVID, they had about 50 or 60 people that they went on this trip that they organized. They spent 1 week in Ghana. and went throughout the country, and 1 week in Nigeria. And they all, including the entertainers who had large followings, and they all put up their videos and discussed what they were seeing. And the end result was that they both won. But so many people learned about both Ghana and Nigeria and the culture from people who lived there, as well as people who were seeing it for the first time, which was really an educational opportunity and increased tourism that was quantifiable for the next few months. Unfortunately, COVID hit right after that, but innovative.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wind up the conversation because it's been absolutely wonderful, but I'm afraid the next session is about to start in about 10 seconds. So it really leaves me to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. For Hafsat, Carl and Anne, you've been absolutely wonderful. Thank you to everyone that's been joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of the questions, there were so many, but I think this has been a fantastic conversation that's so insightful. So thank you everyone, and join us again soon on platform.